My mother screamed across the pool like my children were strangers who didn't belong there. Guests turned. The HOA president stood beside her, watching as she pointed at my 5-year-old and told them to get out. Said we were ruining the look of the party. My son's lips started shaking. My daughter burst into tears. And I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just wrapped them in towels, took their hands, and walked away. Because in that moment, my mother had no idea what she'd just done. The drive home felt longer than it actually was. 40 minutes, technically. But when your kids are crying in the back seat and you're trying to keep your voice steady, time stretches in strange ways. Mia was the first one to speak. Her little voice came out between hiccups. Why didn't Grandma want us in the pool? I kept my eyes on the road. The late afternoon sun flashed through the windshield, bright and indifferent, like nothing had happened. What do you even say to that? How do you explain to a 5-year-old that the woman who's supposed to love her unconditionally cares more about appearances than feelings? I think Grandma was just having a stressful day, I said quietly. It sounded weak even to me. In the rearview mirror, I saw Ethan sitting perfectly still. 7 years old, staring out the window watching the trees blur past. He hadn't said a single word since we left the lake house. That silence hurt more than Mia's crying. Kids should be loud. They should complain about wet swimsuits and argue about snacks. They shouldn't sit there like tiny adults trying to understand humiliation. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. For years, I had told myself that patience was the right choice, that keeping the peace mattered more than winning arguments, that family was complicated and sometimes you just had to swallow things and move on. But something about watching my children stand there dripping wet, confused, being told they were ruining the aesthetic, shifted something inside me. Patience, I realized, isn't infinite. Eventually you run out. The rest of the drive passed in quiet fragments. Mia eventually leaned against Ethan's shoulder and fell asleep. Ethan kept staring out the window like he was trying to solve a puzzle too big for him. When we finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same as it always had. Small, simple. 3 bedrooms, a narrow porch, no lake view. No glossy black stone deck overlooking a marina, but it was quiet, and it was ours. I carried Mia inside and set her on the couch. Ethan kicked off his shoes and wandered in without saying anything. I grabbed a blanket, turned on a movie they both loved, and tucked it around them. The soft glow of the TV filled the living room. Within minutes, their breathing slowed. The storm had passed for them, at least for tonight. For me, it was just beginning. I walked past the kitchen without stopping. Normally, I would have made tea, maybe called a friend, tried to talk through what happened. Not tonight. I went straight down the hallway to the back room. My office. The place where the rest of my life actually happened. I sat down in the chair, pressed the power button on my monitors, and watched the screen slowly wake up. Blue light spilled across the desk, quiet and clinical. Outside the room, the movie played softly. My kids were safe. The house was calm. Inside the office, though, something else was happening. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about keeping the peace anymore. I was thinking about ending it. The monitors finished waking up with that soft electronic glow I've always found comforting. Out there in the world, everything is loud and emotional and messy. In here, it's just numbers systems and quiet decisions. I logged into the property management portal. 3 seconds later, the dashboard loaded. Rows of properties appeared on the screen, addresses, tenant statuses, monthly figures. Most people looking at it wouldn't think twice. Just another asset list. just another spreadsheet. But my eyes went straight to the top entry. 1400 Obsidian Way. I clicked it. The file opened instantly. The details filled the screen like a report that had been waiting patiently for me to notice something. Property 4-bedroom waterfront estate. Status active lease. Tenant Angela, my mother. Below that was the number I'd seen every month for the past 5 years. Current rent, $1,440 per month. I leaned back in my chair and stared at it. If you know anything about lakefront property and that zip code, you already know that number is absurd. Houses like that, 4 bedrooms, private dock, unobstructed. Marina views don't rent for anything close to that. Market value is closer to $4,800 a month, which means every single month there was a gap, a large one. A gap of about $3,360. That gap didn't disappear into thin air. I was covering it, quietly, every month. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance, repairs, landscaping, HOA fees. The difference between what the house actually costs and what my mother paid. People like to imagine wealth as this loud, flashy thing. Cars, jewelry, big announcements. The reality is much quieter. It's spreadsheets like this. I scrolled through the payment history. Month after month of identical numbers. Same discounted rent. Same silent subsidy. 5 years of it. That's nearly $200,000 I'd poured into that house. At the time, I told myself it was a gift. But to explain why I did it, we have to go back a few years. 5 years ago, my life looked very different. I was working as a lead data architect at a tech startup most people had never heard of. The kind of company where everyone works too much, the coffee is terrible, and the founders promise that someday all the stock options will mean something. For a long time, it felt like a gamble. Then, one morning, we walked into a meeting and found out a major conglomerate wanted to buy us. Within a few months, everything changed. The company was acquired, contracts were signed, lawyers got involved. Numbers started appearing in places where numbers had never appeared before. When everything settled after taxes, after the long conversations with financial advisors, I walked away with about $3.5 million. Not billionaire money, but life-changing money. Enough that I didn't have to panic about bills anymore. Enough that I could breathe. People kept asking what I was going to buy. A bigger house, a sports car, maybe a vacation property somewhere dramatic and expensive. But the first thing I bought wasn't for me. It was 1400 Obsidian Way. That lake house had been my mother's obsession for as long as I could remember. When I was a kid, we used to go to the public beach nearby. She'd point across the water at the houses along the shoreline, the ones with private docks and polished decks, and she'd talk about them like they were symbols of some life she deserved but never quite reached. And the one she loved most was always the same one. The house with the black stone deck. The one overlooking the marina. The one that eventually went on the market the same year my startup sold. So I bought it, not under my name, through a blind trust connected to an LLC with a deliberately boring name. Something so forgettable nobody would ever bother digging into it. Then I had the property management company handle everything. On paper, my mother wasn't living in a house her daughter bought. She was simply renting from an anonymous landlord. When I told her the house was available, when I arranged for her to move in at a rent she could afford, she cried. She hugged me like I had finally become the daughter she could be proud of. At least that's what I thought. I told myself the secrecy was temporary, that once she was settled, once she was happy, maybe our relationship would soften. Maybe the lake view and the big deck and the beautiful house would finally quiet whatever bitterness she carried around. Maybe she'd stop looking at me like I was a disappointment, so I became her landlord, a silent one, a ghost in the system. Every month the payments came in. Every month I covered the difference, and every month I told myself it was worth it. But sitting there in front of that glowing screen after what happened at the pool, something about that number looked different. $1,440. It didn't look like generosity anymore. It looked like the price I had been paying to be tolerated. For a long moment, I just stared at the numbers. Then I opened the spreadsheet on my second monitor. It was a simple document. Nothing fancy, just rows and columns I'd built years ago when I first bought the property. At the time, it was meant to help me track expenses, insurance renewals, HOA dues, property taxes, repairs. Now it looked more like a ledger of something else entirely. Column A listed the actual market rent for a waterfront property in that zip code, $4,800 per month. Column B listed what Angela paid, $1,440. Side by side, the difference looked almost ridiculous, like someone had accidentally left out a digit. But there it was. Month after month, year after year, I scrolled down slowly. 12 months became 24. 24 became 36. Then 48. 60. 5 full years. Each row quietly repeating the same truth. Every single month, I had been covering about $3,360 of the real cost. Not charging it, not even mentioning it, just absorbing it. I grabbed a calculator even though I already knew roughly what the number would be. 3,360 times 12 times 5. The total appeared on the screen. $201,600. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. $200,000. $200,000 that had quietly flowed from my account into the foundation of my mother's lifestyle. The polished deck, the lake view, the carefully staged dinners with HOA board members, the champagne glasses clinking on the same deck she had just screamed at my kids to get off. For years I'd framed it as generosity, a daughter helping her mother live comfortably, a successful child sharing the harvest with the person who raised her. But looking at the spreadsheet now, that story didn't quite hold up. Because generosity usually comes with gratitude, or at least respect. What I'd been getting instead was criticism, dismissive comments, little reminders that I hadn't married well enough, that I drove the wrong car, that I didn't present myself the right way. And yesterday, it had escalated all the way to humiliating my children. Right there in front of half the neighborhood, I stared at the glowing columns again. The truth slid into place slowly like a piece of a puzzle I'd been avoiding. This wasn't kindness, it was a tax. A quiet little fee I'd been paying every month. Not for the house, for peace. For the illusion that if I just kept things smooth enough, polite enough, generous enough, maybe she'd finally treat me like a daughter instead of a disappointment. There's a term people sometimes use for that dynamic. The keep the peace tax. If you grew up as the family scapegoat, you know exactly what it feels like. You swallow the insult. You cover the bill. You apologize first. You do whatever it takes to avoid the next explosion. And for years, I'd been paying that tax without even realizing it. But something about watching my son stand there silently by the pool, staring at the ground while his grandmother told him he didn't belong, that broke the illusion. I looked back at the property management dashboard, at the open file for 1400 Obsidian Way, at the line that read, Tenant Angela status active. My cursor hovered over the menu labeled Lease Actions. There was a small drop-down arrow beside it. I clicked it. A list appeared. Renew less. Modify terms. Terminate lease. My hand didn't shake. I didn't sit there debating the morality of it. I didn't replay old Christmas dinners in my head. I didn't imagine the inevitable screaming phone call that would come later. Because the truth was simple. Yesterday at the pool, my mother had spent the last bit of patience I had left. I clicked terminate lease. A confirmation window appeared. Are you sure you want to proceed? Notice period. I typed 60 days. Reason. I entered 2 words. Owner discretion. For a second, the screen just sat there waiting. One more chance to back out. Then I pressed submit. The system processed the request. A small green notification flashed across the top of the screen. Update successful. Notice generated. Delivery scheduled. And just like that, it was done. The room fell quiet again. But this time, the silence felt different. Not empty. Final. Like the heavy door of a vault slowly swinging shut. The notice went out the next morning. 10:17 a.m. I know the exact time because I was sitting at my desk watching the property management dashboard when the status changed from sent to delivered. The system was efficient, like that cold, precise, completely indifferent to family drama. The email itself was standard. No emotion, no explanation. Just a clean bureaucratic message from the property management company. Notice to vacate. 1,400. Obsidian way lease. Status terminated. Notice period. 60 days. That was it. A few lines of text that quietly ended a 5-year arrangement. For a while, nothing happened. No calls, no messages, no sudden explosion of outrage. Just silence. Then my phone lit up. Not with my mother's name. With my sister's. Chloe. Her text came through in a rush of bubbles. Did you do something yesterday? A second message appeared almost immediately. Mom just got some weird email from the rental company and she's freaking out. Then another. You seriously need to call her and apologize. I stared at the screen. Apologize? For what? The next message answered that. You totally ruined the vibe at the party. The HOA president was there. You made her look unstable. Ruined the vibe. That was Chloe's currency. Not truth. Not fairness. Just atmosphere. Presentation. The illusion that everything was perfect. The fact that Mom had screamed at 2 small children in front of a crowd apparently didn't factor into the equation. But the messages didn't stop there. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Angela, my mother. Her first text was exactly what you'd expect. You ungrateful child. Then another. I try to give you a nice afternoon at the lake and you throw a tantrum. I leaned back in my chair and read the words carefully. Throw a tantrum? Right. The third message arrived seconds later. Now, the universe is punishing me with some kind of computer glitch. I actually blinked at that one. A glitch, she continued. The rental company sent me some ridiculous notice saying the lease is terminated. Another bubble appeared. Fix your energy, Jasmine. You attract chaos. I sat there staring at the phone. Somehow in her mind, the eviction notice wasn't the result of a decision. It was a cosmic side effect of my negative energy. The delusion would have been impressive if it wasn't so exhausting. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened another tab on my computer and pulled up Instagram. Chloe's story was already live. Of course it was. The video opened on her standing in the guest lodge, the detached studio space on the lake house property. The one I'd paid to renovate a couple years earlier. She was holding a green juice, perfectly styled hair, perfect lighting. Ugh, family drama is so draining, she told her followers with a sympathetic smile. She tilted the camera slightly. My sister came over yesterday, looking like a total mess, she continued. Honestly, it's sad when people just let themselves go. I felt my jaw tighten. She kept talking, and her kids were totally wild. Like, no manners. Then she shrugged lightly. Anyway, ignore the haters. Influencer bootcamp starts in 10 minutes. I watched the story loop once, then twice, then a third time. There it was. My sister mocking the woman who had quietly paid for the roof over her head while drinking juice in a building I owned. At the same time, another notification popped up on the property management dashboard. Tenant portal message received. I opened it. The tone was very different. To whom it may concern, the message began politely. This notice appears to be an error. It was signed Angela, my mother, the same woman who had just called me ungrateful and unstable. But here, writing to the anonymous landlord, her tone had transformed completely. I am the owner's mother. We have an understanding, she wrote. Please correct this immediately, or I will be forced to contact my lawyer. I sat there for a moment, looking between the two screens. On my phone, angry messages attacking Jasmine the failure. On my computer, a carefully worded request begging the mysterious landlord to fix a mistake. They had no idea those two people were the same. And the strangest part, they never even considered the possibility. I closed Instagram. The videos, the insults, the smug little performances, they all blurred together after a while. None of it actually mattered anymore. Emotion had done its job. Now it was time for process. I turned back to the property management dashboard and reopened the tenant file for 1400 Obsidian Way. My mother had already filed a formal dispute ticket through the portal. Apparently, sometime after sending me those angry texts, she had decided to switch tactics with the landlord. The message was still sitting there in the system. This notice is clearly an error. I am the owner's mother and we have an agreement. It ended predictably with a vague threat about contacting a lawyer. I didn't respond, because in the legal world, responding emotionally is almost always the wrong move. What you do instead is gather evidence. I navigated to the vendor services tab and selected the property manager assigned to the house. His name was David, a quiet, methodical man who had exactly the personality you want when dealing with expensive real estate. No drama, no opinions, just documentation. I opened a new request. Inspection type urgent for cause. That option triggers a priority review under the lease terms. Landlords can request it when there's a reasonable concern about damage, unauthorized activity, or safety violations. In the comment box, I wrote 2 short lines: potential property damage, possible unauthorized commercial use of premises. Then I clicked Authorize Inspection. The system confirmed the request. David would schedule a walkthrough within 24 hours. And that was that. No shouting, no accusations, just procedure. The report arrived the next morning at 8:15 a.m. It came as a PDF attachment, 18 pages long. I opened it slowly, scrolling through the first few images. Exterior shots, dock condition, landscaping. Nothing unusual at first glance. Page 4 made me stop. The photo filled the screen. The main foyer floor. When I bought the house, I had personally selected the hardwood for that space. Brazilian walnut, dark, dense, incredibly durable. It's the kind of flooring that can last decades if it's treated properly. The boards in the photo looked like they'd been attacked with a crowbar. Deep gouges ran across the grain, long jagged scars where something heavy had been dragged across the surface without protection. I read the inspector's note beneath the image. Damage consistent with repeated movement of large furniture without floor protection. I leaned closer to the screen. These weren't small scratches from normal use. Someone had cleared the room, probably for one of those parties my mother loved throwing. and they hadn't cared what happened to the floor in the process. I kept scrolling. The damage estimate was already listed. Projected repair cost $12,000. The next few pages documented smaller issues. Scuffed walls, loose railings. Nothing catastrophic, but together they painted a picture. Carelessness, entitlement. The real shock came around page 12. That section was labeled Guest Lodge Interior. The guest lodge had originally been designed as a quiet retreat. When I bought the property, I even paid extra to renovate it. Fresh paint, built-in shelves, soft lighting. The photos in the report showed something completely different. The room had been transformed into what looked like a small production studio. Professional lighting rigs were bolted directly into the drywall. Not clipped, not temporary. Bolted. Cables ran along the ceiling and down the walls. Several of the mounts had actually cracked the plaster. I flipped to the next photo. Racks of merchandise boxes stacked along the hallway. Another shot showed folding chairs arranged in rows like a classroom, blocking the emergency exit. Then I saw the last image in that section, a sheet of paper taped to the wall. The inspector had zoomed in close enough that the text was perfectly readable. Influencer boot camp, weekend schedule. Below it was a list of sessions. Content strategy, personal branding, monetization. And at the bottom of the page, ticket pricing, $300 per person. I sat back slowly. Chloe wasn't just filming little lifestyle videos in the guest house. She was running a full business operation on a residential lease, without permission, without permits, without even bothering to hide it. I scrolled back through the photos again. The damaged floors, the structural alterations, the commercial activity. For the first time since the pool incident, something in my chest went completely cold. Because up until now, this situation had felt messy, personal, a painful family conflict. But staring at those inspection photos, the entire dynamic shifted. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. This was about violations, clear ones, documented ones, the kind that turn emotional arguments into legal facts. I didn't react right away. For a few minutes, I just sat there with the inspection report open on my screen, slowly scrolling through the photos again. Not because I needed to see them twice, but because I wanted to be certain of something. Emotion had no place in what came next. Anger leads to mistakes, and mistakes are expensive. Documentation, on the other hand, wins cases. So I opened a new document. The blank page waited quietly while I began typing. Not a message, not a daughter's plea, a formal notice of lease violation. The tone had to be precise, neutral, almost boring. That's how these things work. The more dramatic the situation, the calmer the language becomes. I started with the basics. Property address, 1400 Obsidian Way. Tenant of record, Angela Lease. Status active. Under violation review. Then I moved into the details. The first section addressed the flooring. I attached the photo from page 4 of the inspection report, the Brazilian walnut floors in the main foyer, the deep gouges running through the wood like claw marks. Beneath the image, I inserted the inspector's notes and the contractor's estimate. Projected repair cost $12,000. The wording was simple. Damage to flooring determined to exceed normal wear and tear under Clause 9. Preservation of premises. No emotion, just facts. The second section addressed the guest lodge. I added the photographs showing the lighting rigs bolted into the drywall, the cracked plaster around the mounting points, the cables running through the ceiling, structural alterations without landlord authorization, another clause violation. Then came the final piece, The photo of Chloe's schedule taped to the wall. Influencer bootcamp, $300 per attendee. I included the image followed by a brief paragraph referencing the lease agreement. Clause 14. Commercial activity prohibited on residential property without written authorization. The evidence spoke for itself. Rows of chairs, merchandise racks, paid training sessions being advertised. This wasn't someone casually filming social media videos. It was a business. And businesses don't operate inside residential lease agreements unless the landlord approves it, which I hadn't. At the bottom of the document, I added the financial summary, security deposit status, forfeit due to confirmed lease violations, estimated damages exceeding deposit, $20,000 plus pending final contractor review. I read through the document one more time. Clean, precise, unemotional. Then I converted the file to PDF. The property management portal made the next step easy. I opened the tenant communication tab and uploaded the document along with the inspection photos. 3 attachments: violation notice, inspection report, damage estimates. For a second, the cursor hovered over the send button. 5 years ago, sending something like this would have felt impossible. I would have imagined the phone calls, the accusations, the inevitable family meltdown. Now, it just felt procedural, necessary. I clicked send. The system processed the upload and generated an automated notification to the tenant. Angela would receive the documents through the portal and by email. No dramatic confrontation, no emotional argument. Just paperwork arriving quietly in her inbox. They had spent years treating everything like a performance, like status appearances and social influence could bend reality. But reality doesn't work that way. Reality lives in contracts, and contracts don't care about family. The inspection report had given me leverage. But 2 days later, my lawyer called with something else entirely. Something heavier. He didn't start with small talk. He never does. His hourly rate is high enough that nobody wastes time on pleasantries. Jasmine, he said, his voice steady through the speaker. I need to ask you something before I send this file. I leaned back in my chair. Okay, did you ever give your mother written permission to represent herself as the owner of the property to the homeowners association? The question landed strangely. No, I said. Why would I do that? There was a pause. Then my email notification chimed. Take a look at what I just forwarded, he said. I opened the message. The subject line read, HOA correspondence, discovery documents. Attached was a scanned packet of records from the Lake House Homeowners Association. Meeting minutes, architectural requests, internal letters between board members. I clicked the first document. At the top was the association letterhead. Below it, a list of attendees from a board meeting 4 years earlier. I scanned down the names, and there she was. Angela, property owner, 1400 Obsidian Way. I frowned. Maybe it was a mistake. I opened the next file. Another meeting record. Another vote tally on a community rule change. Again, Angela, owner representative. I kept scrolling. Document after document told the same story. For 4 years, my mother had been attending HOA meetings, not as a tenant, but as the owner of the house, voting on bylaws, approving neighborhood guidelines, hosting mixers, introducing herself to the board as the woman who had purchased the property with cash as an investment. The language in the notes was casual, admiring even. Angela discussed her recent renovation plans. Angela offered insight on waterfront property values. Angela volunteered to host the spring social at her home. My fingers tightened slightly on the mouse. She hadn't just allowed people to assume she owned the house. She had constructed an entire identity around it. The successful investor, the lakefront homeowner. The elegant woman hosting events on the black stone deck overlooking the marina, all of it built on a lie. I flipped to the next document. This one was thicker, an architectural variance request submitted to the HOA. The title caught my eye immediately. Application Obsidian Deck Installation. Of course, the deck. The same one she'd stood on while screaming at my kids to get out of the pool. I started reading the form. It described the materials, the dimensions the contractor involved. The association had strict rules about exterior changes, especially anything visible from the water, which meant the application required a signature from the property owner. My eyes moved down the page. At the bottom was a signature line. For a moment, my brain didn't quite process what I was seeing, because the name written there was mine. Jasmine, looping confident black ink across the page. But it wasn't my handwriting. I know my own signature. This one had the same general shape, but the strokes were wrong. The angle was off. The J was too wide. Someone had tried to copy it. My stomach tightened slowly. "Do you see it?" my lawyer asked over the phone. "Yes," I said quietly. "That's the document they approved when the deck was built." He continued. "And according to the HOA records, it was submitted by your mother." I stared at the page, the signature, my name, written by someone else. And suddenly, a memory surfaced from years ago. My mother sitting at the kitchen table signing permission slips for school trips when I was a kid. Same flowing letters, same exaggerated curves. She'd had decades of practice writing my name. "This isn't just misrepresentation," my lawyer said calmly. "If she signed your name on a property authorization form, that's forgery." The word hung in the air. Forgery? Not exaggeration. Not family drama. A crime. I leaned back in my chair, still staring at the screen. For a long time, I had tried to explain my mother's behavior as insecurity, as someone chasing status because she'd never quite felt important. But looking at that document, something became painfully clear. The house wasn't just a place for her to live. It was a costume. The lake view, the parties, the deck. All of it was part of a role she was playing. Acknowledging that her daughter owned the property would have shattered the illusion. It would have forced her to admit that the life she was presenting to the world depended on someone she considered a failure, and that was unacceptable to her. So she did the only thing that preserved the story. She rewrote reality. She attended meetings as the owner, accepted praise for renovations, and when paperwork required proof, she simply signed my name. My lawyer spoke again. "Jasmine forging a signature on real estate documentation isn't a minor issue." I didn't answer right away. I was still staring at that page, thinking about the moment by the pool. The disgust in her voice when she called my kids embarrassing. She needed me to be a failure. Because if I wasn't, the entire stage she'd built for herself would collapse. "Legally," he continued, "this moves the situation out of civil territory. It becomes fraud, potentially a felony." The word felony didn't shock me as much as it probably should have. Because in that moment, something else had settled in my mind. My mother hadn't just lied. She hadn't just taken advantage of my generosity. She had stolen my name, all so she could keep pretending to be someone she wasn't. My lawyer let the silence sit for a moment. Not the awkward kind, the deliberate kind. The kind that gives a person time to understand exactly where they're standing. "Jasmine," he said finally, his voice calm, almost clinical. "I want to be very clear about what we're looking at." I kept my eyes on the scanned document. My name, her handwriting. "This is no longer just a landlord-tenant issue," he continued. "If your mother signed your name on an architectural authorization involving real property that qualifies as forgery, and because it involves property records and financial liability, it falls under fraud statutes." Fraud. The word sounded heavier than the rest. This moves the case out of simple eviction territory, he added. We're now looking at potential criminal charges. For a moment, I said nothing. Not because I was shocked, because strangely I wasn't. I thought about the way she had looked at me by the pool. The tight smile, the disgust in her voice when she told my children they were ruining the aesthetic. She had to believe I was a failure. If I wasn't, everything she had been telling the world about herself would fall apart. The lake house wasn't just a place to live. It was proof. Proof that she was successful, important, respected. The deck, the parties, the HOA meetings, the stories about buying the property with cash. All of it built a version of reality where she was the wealthy matriarch and I was a disappointing daughter who got by. Acknowledging that I owned the house would have destroyed that story overnight. So instead, she replaced me. She signed my name. She stepped into the role herself. My lawyer's voice pulled me back. We can proceed in a couple of ways, he said. You could treat this strictly as a civil matter, eviction damages and recovery costs, or we can escalate and file an affidavit regarding the forged signature. He paused. If we do that, the sheriff's department and the district attorney may get involved. I leaned back in my chair and looked again at the forged signature on the screen. All those years I'd been trying to keep the peace, trying to protect her feelings, trying to preserve some version of a relationship that clearly only existed in my imagination. She hadn't been protecting anything. She had been protecting a performance. I exhaled slowly. Draft the affidavit, I said. My voice sounded steady even to me. And contact the sheriff's office. When the eviction date comes, I want a civil standby present. Another pause on the line. Understood, he said. The boundary between mother and tenant had already disappeared. Now the line between tenant and criminal was beginning to show. And for the first time in years, I wasn't going to step back from it. 60 days passed. Not a single moving truck showed up at the house. No packing boxes appeared on the dock. No furniture disappeared from the windows. If anything, the place looked busier than ever. Because instead of preparing to leave, my mother made a different choice. She sent out invitations. Digital ones, of course. Polished graphics, gold lettering. Summer solstice soiree. Lakeside at 1400 Obsidian Way. It was a power move. If she filled the deck with 50 well-dressed guests and half the HOA board, she could force the story back under her control. Public embarrassment had always been her greatest weapon. She was betting that I wouldn't dare show up, or if I did, that I wouldn't dare make a scene. She was betting on the daughter who spent years swallowing things to keep the peace. But that daughter didn't own the deed. I pulled up to the gate at 6:15 p.m. The evening sun was settling into that golden lake light that makes everything look more expensive than it really is. I wasn't driving my sedan. I was sitting in the passenger seat of a sheriff's department cruiser. Behind us, a locksmith's van idled quietly. Deputy Miller stepped out first. He had already reviewed the file, the eviction order, the affidavit. To him, this wasn't a family argument. It was a procedure. We walked around the side of the house, toward the deck. Even before we reached the lawn, I could hear it. Jazz music, glasses clinking, low laughter drifting over the water. The party was in full swing. When we stepped into view, the music stopped first. Then the conversations. One by one, heads turned toward the uniform. My mother stood near the railing of the obsidian deck, wearing white linen and holding a champagne flute like she was hosting a magazine photo shoot. Beside her stood the HOA president. A few feet away, Chloe had her phone up filming the sunset for another live stream. For a second, nobody spoke. Then, my mother set her glass down and walked toward us. Her smile didn't disappear. It hardened. "Officer," she said, voice trembling with carefully practiced concern. "Thank goodness you're here." She gestured toward me with a soft, pitying look. "My daughter is having some kind of episode," she explained gently to the crowd. "She's become obsessed with this house. She's trying to sabotage my event because she's jealous." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Angela turned back to me, lowering her voice like she was soothing a child. "Jasmine, honey," she said softly, "please go home. We can talk about your medication later. It was a good performance, if you didn't know the paperwork." Deputy Miller didn't respond to her. He looked at me. "Ma'am?" he asked calmly. "Is this the tenant?" The silence across the deck was so complete. I could hear the water against the dock. "Yes," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but every single person heard it. "That is the tenant," I continued, "and she is currently trespassing." Angela let out a sharp laugh. "Tenant," she snapped. "I am the owner." She turned quickly to the HOA president. "Bob, tell him. Tell him who owns this house. Hysterics are useful when you don't have paperwork." I reached into my bag and pulled out the bound file. Inside were copies of the deed, the eviction notice, the inspection reports, and the fraud affidavit. I placed it on the table beside the appetizers. Then I pulled out one more thing, the master key. Heavy brass, every lock on the property opened with it. "The owner doesn't love you, Mom," I said quietly. "The owner evicted you 60 days ago." Her face changed. Not slowly, all at once. "You're lying," she said. "You can't afford this house." I held up the deed. "I bought it 5 years ago," I said. "So, you could live here." The murmurs started then. Guests whispering. The HOA president staring at the documents like someone had just handed him a live grenade. I met my mother's eyes. "You forged my signature," I said. "You ran a business here. You destroyed the floors. And you ignored a legal eviction." I stepped aside slightly. "Deputy Miller." He nodded once. "Eviction order confirmed," he said. Then he turned to the crowd. "This property is now being cleared. I'm going to ask everyone to exit the premises." My mother stood frozen on the obsidian deck she had fought so hard to claim. The performance was over, and for the first time, everyone could see the truth. The morning after the eviction, the house felt strangely quiet. The echo of the previous night's confrontation still lingered in the air, but now it was replaced by the practical rhythm of people doing their jobs. A line of movers worked steadily through the front doors, carrying out boxes, furniture, and the carefully staged decorations that had once been meant to impress a crowd. Without music, guests, or laughter, the place looked less like a palace and more like what it truly was, a house that had been occupied by someone who no longer belonged there. The movers worked with polite efficiency. Items were cataloged, wrapped, and loaded into trucks. Some pieces were clearly expensive, but worn from years of display rather than use. Others looked like props, purchased more for appearances than comfort. By midday, the once crowded rooms were stripped bare, revealing scuffed floors, nail holes, and faded patches on the walls where paintings had hung. Repair crews followed close behind. A locksmith replaced the front locks and reset the security system. Contractors patched drywall, tightened loose railings on the obsidian deck, and began repainting rooms that had been covered in dramatic colors, chosen for parties rather than living. With every repair, the house seemed to reclaim its calm. Meanwhile, Angela's new reality looked very different. Her belongings had been delivered to a small apartment across town, a plain building with thin carpets and narrow hallways. The living room window faced a parking lot instead of a skyline. There was no sweeping deck, no marble entryway, and most importantly, no audience. The phone that had once buzzed constantly with invitations and compliments was quiet now. The social circle she had tried so hard to impress had vanished almost overnight. The same people who had once admired the spectacle had no interest in the aftermath. And the story wasn't over. While the house returned to normal, piece by piece, the legal system moved at its own steady pace. The fraud allegations that had surfaced during the property dispute were still working their way through court filings, investigations, and hearings. Each step added another layer of consequence that no party could hide behind. In the end, the spectacle Angela had built her life around dissolved the moment the crowd disappeared. Without the house, the parties, or the illusion of control, there was only silence and the slow arrival of accountability. Later that week, I sat on the dock at the lake with my kids, our feet dangling over the water as we passed around melting ice cream cones. No guests, no performances, just quiet laughter and a warm breeze off the water. It struck me then how different real security feels from chasing status. One demands an audience, the other gives you peace. And honestly, peace is the better investment. If you enjoy stories about reclaiming that kind of freedom, stick around and follow along for more.